I want to express my personal regrets that I'm unable to attend your important conference today. I recognize that many leading scholars from around the world are in attendance, along with prominent political figures and thought leaders, and I would have loved to have joined them had things worked out. The topic of human development is extremely important, and it's encouraging to see such a distinguished group of scholars and socially concerned individuals discussing this important issue. Now, as has probably already been said and will be said throughout the conference, Uruguay has made important strides in reducing poverty. It seems, however, as often happens in democracies, that redistribution has been tilted to the elderly. Of course, the elderly vote, and the children do not. And the parents of the children frequently are so busy and so pressed for time that they themselves are less politically active. We know, and it will be mentioned in the course of this conference, that Uruguay has serious problems with school dropout and with other issues associated with human capital formation of the next generation. So even though it's made important strides in reducing poverty, it is important that we understand that we focus on those left behind and we understand a strategy that will build the success of the next generation and will promote social mobility. Now, today, I was especially gratified by the dual emphasis in this conference on early childhood and adolescence as two windows of opportunity over the life cycle. I think it's important, and it's unique among conferences of this variety, to properly introduce a life cycle focus to the issues of skill formation. The whole subject of human capital formation recently has been contaminated by advocates who are shouting about specific policies and specific programs at specific stages of the life cycle. And it's great to see that the conference today will look at the whole life cycle and hopefully integrate the stages of the life cycle. So for example, in my own country, the United States, and around the world, there's a lot of emphasis on promoting schooling, and in particular formal schooling, and post-secondary schooling, for example, college. But frequently the advocates who properly state the value of college, at least for some people, do not understand or do not state the determinants of where the skills that promote college attendance and college readiness are formed earlier in the life cycle, and how we can enhance the lives of children throughout years of schooling, rather than just focusing on college. Schooling is vital, and education, we know, plays a major role, and education should be encouraged. But we should also understand how to create successful education systems, what they are, and how to make children ready to benefit from the education they may receive. Now, in the early years, a topic with which I'm associated in my recent work, there are a lot of empty slogans abound, and I'm afraid a myth has sometimes been cited, or at least put out there, that it's all over for children at age 3, and that the brain is hardwired by then. We know that these slogans that may be persuasive in a rhetorical debates and in maybe discussions at certain political forums, serious scholars recognize the inadequacy of these slogans and the need to understand that the real targets of opportunity in early childhood are still forming well past age 3 and into elementary school and on into early secondary school and throughout secondary school. There are real targets of opportunity, and they received less emphasis. And I think it's important that we have a consistent theory and a consistent view of how the structure of human capital formation emerges and where and when in the life cycle effective interventions can be made and what skills are fruitfully fostered at various stages of the life cycle. If I'd been able to come, I would have emphasized that one constant theme of successful interventions, successful schooling, successful job training programs, successful preschools over the life cycle is some form of age-adapted parenting, or sometimes for older children, adolescents called mentoring. Guiding and advising children and scaffolding them by applying personalized education, by giving them challenges, finding out where they are and what the next steps should be and where to guide them to those next steps, incrementally, one at a time, is about constructive, informed feedback and challenges made to the child. And children differ in the rate at which they acquire these skills. So truly successful schools, preschools, and job training programs recognize the personalized nature of successful instruction. Such wise interventions, when properly evaluated, have been shown to have a high rate of return. There have been benefits throughout the life cycle for improving health, reducing crime, enhancing earnings, and promoting social engagement, voting, trust, and activities that create a healthier society. Now, some of my recent work with Jorge Garcia shows that an intensive intervention has a high rate of return. An intensive intervention that starts early, that provides early guidance to parents about health and what's needed for health care, and that also promotes parent-child interactions and works with the child, stimulates the child, has a very high rate of return. So when we studied children enrolled in these programs and then followed up some 40 years later, so we have a randomly assigned treatment group or randomly assigned control group, we find that there's a very high rate of return of about 13.7% per annum, which is very high in terms of any kind of social project evaluation. And this is a rate of return that's inclusive of the welfare cost of collecting taxes, and the welfare cost of distortions created by a tax system. So we need to understand that these rates of return are very competitive with most projects that are in the fiscal realm. But I want to issue in my final remark here some warnings that pure expenditure is not enough. Recently, I've been engaged in Denmark. And Denmark, we know, is a country that shows a great deal of economic mobility. And by that I mean the link between the child's income and the parent's income is much weaker than it is, for example, in Uruguay and Chile, in Argentina, and also in the United States. And many people have looked at Denmark and some of the Scandinavian welfare states and have noted properly that there's more equal expenditures on schooling across children, that virtually every child in Denmark has access to a preschool, and the preschool is high quality, at least it's of uniform quality around the country. So nearly 100% participation. And there's equality not only in the expenditures, but also in the quality of the research staff and the staff of helping individuals at the school level. So the teachers and the teaching assistants are good, and the evaluators are kind of equally good all around Denmark. But was educational policy the main vehicle of this success story? No, and that's something that's very confusing to many people. If you ask about educational mobility, not income mobility, what you find is the relationship between the parent and the child in terms of the years of schooling attained is about the same in the unequal United States and the very equal Denmark. Well, what's going on? How can this be? Test scores of children in the preschool years are actually higher. The United States has a lower left tail of test scores, and test scores have received a lot of focus, cognitive and even social and emotional test scores. So Denmark is much better in terms of these distributions, and we compare these distributions. But it's also the case that the welfare state has other issues, and those issues and those problems should be avoided. It turns out that mobility, or at least income mobility, is created by a fiscal system. It's by a very high tax rates and very generous transfers to individuals who are in need. But the way that the expenditure is financed, we show in some recent work that's created a sensation in Denmark and is creating much further work on this topic in Denmark, is the way the expenditure was financed. It discourages the attainment of schooling. So actually, children who have even high skills find that the economic rewards for attending school are substantially diminished, much more so in Denmark than in the United States. So I think when you consider these issues at a very broad global level, yes, consider that we know that adolescents are nourishing their own precognitive skills, the cognitive skills and non-cognitive skills. We know that adolescents are changing their ability to manage their anger. There's a maturation process. There's a process. We know that neuroscientists who will speak to you, a very distinguished neuroscientists here today, will tell you about the slow maturation of the prefrontal cortex into the 20s. That creates targets of opportunity where we can advise children, guide them wisely, we can target them, we can build processes of self-control, reflection, and anticipation that'll make wise decisions. But when we put these policies in place, let's also understand that an important part of the skill formation process is designing an effective system-wide policies that take into account both the incentives to acquire skills and the costs of using those skills and of going forward into the educational system. So, as I say, I'm very, very sorry that I can't be with you. I wish you well in your endeavors in these next 2 days. And I regret that I'm not there, but I know that you'll have a great conversation and you have some excellent thought leaders with you, some great economists, some great neuroscientists, and people who are highly informed. But keep in mind that it's not over at age 3, that high tax rates can discourage the acquisition of human capital. So even if we give them a big stock of skills and give them the opportunity to go on and take further education, it may not pay. And that changing the fiscal system so that it does pay is an important part of human capital formation. So good wishes, good luck, and thank you very much for the opportunity to speak to you, if only briefly today.